They say, never judge a book by its cover, but on this glittering night, beneath chandeliers and flashing cameras, a black woman was judged by nothing more than the color of her skin. A security guard blocked her path, pushed her dignity aside, and told her she didn't belong. What he didn't know was that this single act of prejudice would set events in motion that no one at the Gala could have ever imagined. The night shimmered with gold. Spotlights sliced through the sky. Cameras flashed in bursts, and a steady stream of gowns and tuxedos swept toward the entrance of the grandest gala of the season. It was a night meant to celebrate prestige, wealth, and power. But beneath that glitter, a storm was waiting to break. She arrived with quiet grace, her steps measured, her head high. Her gown, a deep emerald silk that caught the light like water, flowed behind her as though it had a life of its own. In her hand, she held a cream-colored envelope, the kind embossed with the Gala's crest, the kind no one could fake. She had been invited. She belonged here. Yet as she reached the velvet rope, her way was barred. A security guard, broad-shouldered and stern, extended his arm and stepped directly in front of her. His expression wasn't one of formality. It was suspicion. His eyes flicked from her face to her dress, and then, almost dismissively, away again. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, voice low but firm. "This event is private. You'll need to step aside." She blinked, stunned. "I have my invitation," she said softly, lifting the envelope so he could see. Her tone was calm, almost careful, as if speaking too loudly might cause the moment to crack in two. The guard didn't even glance at the envelope. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. Guests are arriving through this entrance. Staff and vendors, well, they come through."
"Off the side!"
Her throat tightened. Heat rose to her face, not from the evening air but from the sting of his words. Around her, footsteps slowed. Whispers pricked at her ears. "She's not staff," one woman murmured, clutching her pearls as if the sight of this poised stranger somehow threatened the sanctity of the event. "She must have slipped past," another voice hissed. The woman drew a breath, steadying herself. "I'm not staff. I was invited. Here." She unfolded the invitation fully, the gold foil letters glimmering under the entrance lights. She extended it toward him, hand trembling only slightly. But the guard didn't reach for it. Instead, he leaned closer, lowering his voice as though offering a favor. "Listen, lady. I don't want to cause a scene. Why don't you save yourself the embarrassment and step back? I'm not letting you through." Embarrassment. That word struck harder than the barrier rope stretched across the entrance. Her body stiffened, her jaw set. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, the kind of gaze that doesn't simply look. It weighs, it judges, it strips you bare. She whispered, half to herself, half to him, "Why are you doing this?" The guard straightened, his stance unyielding. "Because you don't belong here." For a moment, time slowed. The laughter from inside the Gala seemed distant, muffled, as if she were trapped beneath glass. She wasn't just being denied entry. She was being erased, her presence declared invalid by a single man in a black suit. The humiliation cut deeper with every passing second. She could have shouted. She could have demanded he check the guest list. She could have forced the issue. Instead, she stood rooted, her dignity locked in a silent battle with the shame rising within her. Finally, she lowered the invitation. Her hands trembled as she slipped it back into her clutch. The crowd surged forward again, Swede, pinged past her like a tide, leaving her stranded at the edge of the night. She turned away, blinking against the sting in her eyes. The city lights blurred into streaks of silver and gold. Behind her, the guard moved on, greeting the next guest with practiced politeness, as if nothing had happened. As if she were invisible. But she was not invisible. Not tonight. Not to the people who watched her retreat with whispers of disbelief, and not to the man who, miles away, would soon hear her trembling voice when she told him what had just taken place. Because while the guard thought he had won a small battle of power, he had unknowingly lit a fuse. And that fuse was about to lead to an explosion no one in that glittering hall could have predicted. The invitation in her hand glimmered under the entrance lights, but it might as well have been invisible. The guard's eyes never left her face. He didn't bend down to read the embossed lettering. He didn't even pretend to check the list on his clipboard. Instead, he leaned back with a smirk that carried the weight of quiet cruelty. "Lady," he muttered, shaking his head, "you don't fool me. People like you try to slip in all the time." The words cut like glass. Gasps whispered through the line of guests behind her. A man in a sharp tuxedo chuckled under his breath. A woman whispered to her friend, "How embarrassing. She should just leave." Every word, every sideways glance pressed down on her shoulders, heavier and heavier. She straightened her back. Calmly, she unfolded the card again, raising it toward him. "Read it. My name is on the list. This is my invitation." But the guard didn't move. His hand hovered protectively over the velvet rope, as if she were some thief plotting to break into a mansion. "I told you," he said slowly, "this list doesn't have your name, and I don't need to check. I can tell." She blinked at him, disbelieving. "You can tell?" Her voice was quiet, but the air around her trembled with restrained anger. The guard gave a short laugh and looked away, already waving forward the nearest couple in line. "Step aside, miss. Don't make this difficult." Difficult. That word tasted bitter. She had done everything right, chosen her gown carefully, arrived on time, carried proof in her hand, and yet, in front of glittering glass doors, she was being cast as a trespasser. A little boy, clutching his father's hand, stared at her. His eyes were wide, innocent, and confused. "Papa, why can't she go in?" he asked. The father squeezed the boy's hand and hurried him along, refusing to answer. Her stomach twisted. In that silence she heard everything. The unspoken truth that dignity, for her, could be denied with a single glance. Still, she refused to beg. Her pride wouldn't allow it. She stepped closer, her voice steady, though her hands trembled against the clutch she held. "Check the list," she repeated. "All I ask is that you check." The guard's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, you're embarrassing yourself. Don't push this any further." Her breath caught. For a moment she felt the urge to scream, to claw her way past him, to make them all see the injustice unfolding right before their eyes. But something inside her told her that doing so would only prove him right in their eyes. So she stood there, silent, still, a statue carved out of sorrow and fire. Around her silk gowns swished, champagne laughter floated, camera shutters clicked. The world carried on as though she were nothing more than a shadow at the edge of the carpet. She lowered her invitation once more, her chest tightening with a deep, hollow ache. The silence between her and the guard grew so loud it drowned out the music from inside. Finally she stepped aside, but as she did, the humiliation followed her like a cloak she could not remove. Every glance that slid across her figure branded her with pity, or worse, with disdain. One guest, an older woman with kind eyes, whispered as she passed, "I'm so sorry, dear." But sympathy did nothing to erase the sting. The woman held her head high, though tears pressed against the corners of her eyes. She walked to the edge of the crowd, away from the red carpet glow, into the shadows of the city lights. Her heart pounded. She fumbled for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen, trembling. Who could she call? Who would understand what had just been stolen from her? With one final glance at the sparkling entrance, she stepped farther into the darkness, alone, humiliated, but not yet broken. Because in her silence, in the way she swallowed her tears and carried her dignity into the night, she had unknowingly passed the weight of this injustice to someone else. And when she finally whispered the truth of what had happened into her husband's ear, that's when the night would change forever. She slipped away from the glowing lights of the Gala, her heels clicking against the pavement as though each step was heavier than the last. The music inside pulsed faintly through the walls, but out here, in the shadows of the side street, silence pressed against her chest. The evening air was sharp, cool against her damp cheeks. Her mascara had begun to smudge, black lines tracing the path of tears she had fought so hard to hold back. Her hands shook as she pulled her phone from her clutch. For a moment she stared at the dark screen, her reflection fractured by the glass. She wasn't sure if she wanted to make the call. Part of her wanted to bury the night, to go home and curl into the quiet safety of her own bed. But the deeper part of her, the part still burning from the humiliation, needed to be heard. With trembling fingers, she pressed his number. The phone rang once, twice, and then a voice she knew better than her own answered. "Hello?" Just one word. Calm. Steady. His tone carried no question, no surprise, as if he had been expecting her call all along. She drew in a shaky breath. "It happened again," she whispered. Her voice cracked under the weight of it. Here was silence on the other end. Not the kind of silence that comes from distraction, but one that listens, that absorbs. She could hear the faint rustle of fabric, as though he was sitting back in his chair, waiting for her to go on. "They wouldn't let me in," she said, her words spilling faster now. "The guard, he didn't even look at the invitation. He said I didn't belong. Everyone saw it. They stared at me like I was some intruder." Her voice faltered and fresh tears welled. "I was humiliated." Again silence. Her throat tightened. "Aren't you going to say something? Anything?" When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, but beneath it ran something darker, like steel beneath velvet. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." So she did. She told him about the whispers, the stares, the way the guard leaned in and dismissed her existence as though she were invisible. Every detail poured out of her, each word sharp with pain. And still, he did not interrupt. He let her empty her heart into the night air until her voice trembled into quiet sobs. Then, for the first time, he spoke with certainty. "You did nothing wrong." 3 simple words. But his voice carried such finality, such weight, that for a brief second, her shame gave way to relief. She whispered, "I should have fought harder. I should have demanded—" "No." His voice cut through her sentence like a blade, calm, controlled, but with an edge that sent a shiver down her spine. "You shouldn't have to fight to be treated with dignity. That is not your burden." Her lips parted, but she found no words. The firmness in his tone told her he had already decided something. After a pause, his voice softened, almost gentle now. "Go home, my love. Rest. Leave this to me." She hesitated. "But what will you do?" The line was quiet again, and in that silence she sensed it, the storm brewing behind his cue. Olm exterior. She couldn't see his face, but she could picture his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening, decisions already forming in his mind. Finally, he answered, with chilling simplicity, "I'll take care of it." Her breath caught. She wanted to press him to ask what he meant, but something in his voice, something unshakable, told her it was better not to ask. So she nodded silently, even though he couldn't see it. "All right," she whispered. "I'm going home." They exchanged no goodbyes. The call ended with a click, leaving her standing alone in the shadows, clutching the phone against her chest as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. Inside those walls, music still played, and laughter still spilled out into the night. But here, beyond the velvet rope, a different kind of music had begun, the quiet drumbeat of vengeance taking shape. Because while she walked away in tears, her husband had already decided that tomorrow the world would look very different. Power often wears a mask. The world may see a businessman, a philanthropist, a quiet man who avoids the spotlight. But behind closed doors, true power is forged in silence, in decisions made with steady hands and unshakable resolve. On the other end of that phone call, her husband sat in his private study. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a single lamp. Floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound books framed him, yet it was the massive oak desk before him that told the real story. Stacks of confidential reports, property deeds, market analyses. This was the war room of a man who moved nations with the stroke of a pen. He leaned back in his chair, phone resting silently beside him now. His face gave away nothing but his eyes. His eyes burned with a controlled fire. For years he had been known only in whispers. Some called him a ghost of Wall Street, others a kingmaker who owned half the city's skyline. But he never sought headlines, never indulged in the vanity of public recognition. His empire thrived precisely because he lived in the shadows, and it was in those shadows that he now prepared his next move. Her humiliation wasn't just personal, it was symbolic, a declaration that her presence, her humanity, could be denied. That cut deeper than any business betrayal, sharper than any financial loss. To him, it was war. He picked up a file from the corner of his desk. The Gala venue's name was stamped across the top in bold lettering. He had considered acquiring it before. Strategically positioned, profitable, a jewel of the city's elite gatherings. But now it was no longer about strategy. It was about justice. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Get me Reynolds," he said. His voice was calm, steady, almost indifferent. Yet his assistant on the other end recognized the undertone. When the boss spoke in that measured tone, it meant something irreversible was about to happen. Within minutes, his inner circle was on the line. Lawyers, brokers, and financial advisors, all of them accustomed to his swift, surgical commands. "I want full control of the property," he said. "Every share, every contract, every clause. I don't care what it takes. By tomorrow night, it's mine." There was a pause. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, such an acquisition would normally take months. Negotiations, regulatory clearances, financing." He cut in, his voice suddenly sharper. "Not months, hours. You know how I operate. Find a way." No one questioned him again. They never did. As the calls went out and the machinery of wealth began to move, he sat in silence, watching the city skyline from his window. Lights flickered across glass towers, symbols of influence and status. But tonight, they meant nothing. Tonight, all that mattered was restoring what had been stripped from the woman he loved. For a moment he thought of her, alone outside that gala, clutching her invitation like a shield that had failed her. He clenched, his jaw. They hadn't just insulted her, they had insulted him. And soon they would learn what that mistake would cost. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily as the hours passed. His empire moved like a tide beneath him, unseen but unstoppable. Lawyers drafted papers at midnight. Brokers pushed calls through at dawn. Money flowed faster than signatures could be inked. By the time the sun began to rise, the impossible was already becoming reality. Finally, as he closed another file and set it aside, he spoke aloud to himself, softly, almost like a vow. You don't dismiss her. Not her. Not ever. His eyes narrowed, and a thin smile traced his lips. Not of joy, but of certainty. The decision was made, the course set. By the next evening, when the gala lights shone again, the same guard who had denied her dignity would find himself standing at the gates of a building that no longer belonged to his employer. It now belonged to her husband. Night fell over the city like a velvet curtain, but for one man, sleep was impossible. The insult that had been dealt to his wife still pulsed through his veins like fire. He had built an empire on silence, patience, and control. But this time, silence would not be enough. In the privacy of his penthouse, far above the restless streets below, the masked billionaire began to move his pieces. The world knew little about him. Reporters had tried for years to catch a glimpse, but his face was rarely seen, his name never spoken in public. Deals happened in shadows, fortunes moved behind closed doors, and tonight, those same shadows would become the instrument of his justice. He sat in a leather chair, phone in hand, voice low but firm. Wake the team. I don't care what hour it is. This deal closes before sunrise. Within minutes, the machinery of wealth roared into motion. Phones buzzed in quiet offices. Lawyers, half asleep, jolted upright as they read his message. Brokers opened laptops in the dark. Advisors pulled on suits, poured black coffee, and prepared for the kind of night that legends are built on. Tikaki. Target was simple yet symbolic. The very venue where his wife had been shoved aside like she was invisible. That grand hall, filled with chandeliers and arrogance, would belong to him before dawn. The calls came in waves. Sir, the owners, they'll never sell this quickly. They'll sell, he replied. His tone was calm, almost too calm. Everyone sells when they realize who's buying. One by one, obstacles fell away. Numbers that would paralyze an ordinary man were nothing more than stepping stones for him. He had spent years building networks that stretched from Wall Street to London, from Dubai to Hong Kong. Tonight, those networks were a storm unleashed. By midnight, contracts were being drafted. By 2 a.m., wires were transferring sums so large they could have rebuilt small nations. Every keystroke, every signature, every whispered instruction carried the weight of his fury, channeled not into rage, but into strategy. And yet, amid the frenzy, his thoughts always returned to her. He pictured the look on her face when the guard had stopped her, the disbelief, the sting of being judged not for who she was, but for what she looked like. That single moment had stripped bare everything he despised about the world. And so, he would not simply buy a building. He would buy back her dignity in a way no one could ignore. Sir, one lawyer said over the line, voice trembling, This is unprecedented. The speed, the amount. It's never been done. Then it will be the first, he replied coldly. History remembers the first. Outside, the city was quiet, unaware of the tidal wave rushing beneath its surface. Deals were sealed in whispers, signatures exchanged over encrypted lines. Somewhere in that restless city, the security guard who had mocked her was probably sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the fact that his world was about to collapse. By 4 a.m., the paper orc was nearly complete. The final signatures were routed through digital seals, and ownership of the venue shifted hands as if destiny itself had written the transfer. The billionaire leaned back, exhaling slowly. He didn't smile. He rarely did. For him, victory was not in celebration. It was in inevitability. The storm had been gathered, and it was now ready to break. As dawn painted the horizon in pale gold, he stood at the window, gazing out across the city. Soon, she would wake to the truth. Soon, the same halls that had turned her away would open their doors only at her command. But for now, he whispered only to himself, "This is just the beginning." And with those words, the night's storm gave way to the promise of morning, the moment where justice would no longer hide in shadows, but step boldly into the light. The night air shimmered with the hum of engines and the glimmer of chandeliers, spilling light through the tall windows of the grand venue. Inside, the Gala was already alive. Music, laughter, glasses clinking. On the outside, however, a different kind of storm was approaching. At the curb, a sleek black limousine rolled to a stop. Its polished doors reflected the marquee lights above. Slowly, deliberately, the door opened, and out stepped the billionaire, his frame tall, steady, and commanding. A beat later, his wife emerged, elegant, poised, and radiant, as though last night's humiliation had only sharpened her dignity. The crowd near the entrance hushed, heads turned, whispers slipped like sparks through dry grass. "Is that them? They came back?" "No. After what happened? But look at her. She's not afraid." At the doors stood the same guard. His posture was as rigid as before, his arrogance barely hidden behind the uniform. His eyes narrowed when he saw the couple approach. He did not flinch nor step aside. In his mind, nothing had changed. The billionaire's voice was calm, yet carried a weight that seemed to ripple through the night. "Good evening. We'll be going in." The guard shifted his shoulders, smirking.
"I don't care who you are. I told you before, this event isn't for people like you." The words hung in the air, sharper than glass. A few guests gasped audibly. Others tried to pretend they hadn't heard, but their eyes betrayed them, wide with unease. The woman did not answer. She simply stood tall, her hand resting lightly on her husband's arm. Her silence carried a strength louder than any retort. The billionaire leaned in slightly, his gaze unblinking. "You might want to be very careful with what you say next." The guard scoffed, glancing at the watching crowd for approval. "And why's that? You think you can walk past me just because you're wearing a fancy suit? Not happening." The murmurs grew. Something was different tonight. There was a presence in the air, an electricity that hadn't been there before. The crowd could sense it, even if they couldn't name it. The woman's eyes met her husband's for a fleeting second. Just enough. He nodded once, subtle, like a silent promise. Then, in a voice meant for the crowd as much as for the guard, he said, "Do you know who owns this building?" The guard laughed, dismissive. "Not you." The billionaire's lips curved into the faintest smile, a smile that promised revelation. He didn't answer, yet. Instead, he placed his hand on the door handle, not waiting for permission. The guard stiffened, ready to push him back again, but something in the billionaire's calm confidence made him hesitate, just for a breath. That hesitation was enough. The doors swung open. Light poured out, gilding the couple as they entered side by side. Gasps followed them inside. Some guests instinctively stepped back to give way, others leaned closer to whisper. Every eye was drawn to them, every word laced with speculation. "Why did they come back?" "They must know something we don't. Look at the guard. He doesn't even realize what's coming." The music faltered for a moment as the couple walked across the marble floor. The orchestra picked back up, but softer, as if even the musicians were waiting for the next act in this silent confrontation. The billionaire and his wife moved with unhurried grace, every step declaring, "We belong here." But at the door, the guard was still fuming. His pride stung, his authority challenged. He barked at another staff member, "Who let them in? Did you see that? They just walked past me."
The staff exchanged nervous looks but said nothing. The weight of silence was louder than any answer. Meanwhile, whispers chased the couple through the hall. Their presence felt like the calm before lightning, like the air tightening before a thunderclap. Something was coming. Everyone knew it. And at the center of it all stood the woman, no longer the guest turned away, but the figure who would soon stand vindicated in the very place she had been shamed. The evening had only just begun, and within hours, this gala would never be remembered for its music or its speeches, but for the storm that was about to break. The chandeliers glimmered like frozen stars, their light dancing across crystal glasses and polished marble floors. The gala was in full swing, an orchestra swelling, gowns sweeping, conversations buzzing. But the moment the billionaire and his wife stepped into the hall, the room shifted. It was as though time itself paused to watch what would unfold. All eyes turned, some in curiosity, some in disbelief, and some in fear, because something in their poise, in their calm, carried the weight of thunder before the storm. The billionaire didn't walk. He commanded the space. His wife, radiant and unshaken, held his arm with quiet dignity. The whispers grew into a low hum, threading through the crowd. What are they doing here? Didn't security? Wait, why do they look so certain? The orchestra faltered, strings trembling before the conductor cut them off entirely. Silence. Pure, heavy silence. And then, his voice carried across the hall. Strong, controlled, resonant. Ladies and gentlemen, I will not keep you guessing. Tonight marks a change. A permanent change. As of this morning... He paused, letting the weight of anticipation draw every breath in the room. This venue, this hall you stand in, belongs to me. Gasps exploded beneath the chandeliers. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. Guests clutched at pearls, at sleeves, at each other's arms. The organizers, standing near the stage, paled. One of them stammered, That's not possible. The billionaire cut him off with a sharp glance. It is not only possible. It is done. Papers signed, contracts sealed, ownership transferred. He allowed the words to settle, like thunder echoing through a canyon. But he wasn't finished. He raised a hand, and in that stillness, one could almost hear the heartbeat of the guard outside. Bring him in. The double doors creaked open. The security guard, the same one who had shoved the woman, the same one who had sneered with arrogance, was pushed forward by another staff member. His uniform seemed smaller now, his arrogance drained from him like water from a cracked jar. The crowd parted, eyes fixed on him. Whispers hissed through the hall like a tide pulling back from the shore. The billionaire's wife did not speak. She simply stood beside her husband, her presence a living reminder of the insult, of the humiliation endured. The billionaire's voice dropped lower, sharper. This man standing before you all represents more than one mistake. He represents the kind of blindness this place has long tolerated, judging by appearances, deciding worth by skin, not by character. And last night, he laid hands on my wife. The guard swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the corners of the hall as though searching for an escape. There was none. I didn't know, the guard stammered. The billionaire cut in, his voice thunderous now. You didn't care to know. That was your failure. A ripple of agreement moved through the guests. Some nodded ashamed. Some clapped softly, uncertainly, as though the truth being spoken had long needed a voice. The billionaire turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the hall. This is no longer a place where arrogance will be rewarded, where cruelty is overlooked.
This venue will not be remembered for its chandeliers or its music. It will be remembered for change. Then, with a motion as cold as it was final, he pointed to the trembling guard. You are dismissed. Permanently. The guard's shoulders sagged. His mouth opened as though to protest, but the weight of the room crushed the words in his throat. 2 staff members stepped forward, guiding him toward the doors. As he was led out, a hush lingered. The kind of hush that hangs after lightning splits the sky, when everyone knows the storm has only begun. The billionaire turned back to the guests, his hand gently resting on his wife's. His voice softened, but it carried the same authority. Tonight, let this be clear. My wife will never again be treated as less than what she is, a woman of dignity, of strength, and of equal worth. This hall will honor that, or it will honor nothing at all. Applause erupted, not the polite kind, but a wave, fierce and unrelenting. Some guests stood clapping, others wiped away tears. The chandeliers shook with the force of it. And in that applause, the couple stood united. No longer humiliated, no longer diminished, but elevated. Yet even in the roar of approval, there lingered a question. If this was only the announcement, what was coming next? The hall was silent. Not the kind of silence that feels comfortable, but the kind that presses down on every chest, heavy and unrelenting. Chandeliers glittered above, frozen like witnesses to the moment. Every eye was fixed on the billionaire who now stood at the center of the grand room, his wife by his side. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to wave his arms or command attention. The simple weight of his presence made the air vibrate. Slowly he turned his gaze toward the very man who had once shoved his wife aside at the entrance, the security guard who had mistaken cruelty for authority. "Bring him forward," the billionaire said, his voice calm but absolute. 2 ushers guided the trembling guard to the center. His face had drained of color, his uniform suddenly seeming too tight, too small for the room that had grown impossibly large around him. Guests leaned forward in their seats, eager, anxious, almost desperate to hear what would come next. The billionaire's words cut through the silence like glass. "You stood at that door," he began, his tone steady, "and you made a choice. You decided that my wife's worth could be measured by her skin." The guard's throat bobbed, his lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. The billionaire continued, "You didn't know who she was. You didn't know who I was. And the truth is, it doesn't matter. Because dignity is not reserved for the wealthy. Respect is not a privilege. It is a right." Gasps rippled through the audience. Some bowed their heads in shame, remembering their own silence at the entrance. Others clasped their hands, as if praying for mercy on the man now trapped beneath the gaze of hundreds. The guard tried to speak again. "Sir, I was just—" But the billionaire raised one hand, silencing him with the faintest gesture. "You were just doing your job," he asked quietly. "A job that gives you permission to strip someone of their humanity?" The guard's eyes flickered, searching for escape, but none existed. Then the billionaire did something unexpected. He stepped closer. His voice softened, but the softness carried more weight than any shout ever could. "I won't curse you. I won't raise my voice, because I want everyone here to remember this moment. Remember that cruelty hides behind excuses, that humiliation, when left unchecked, grows like a poison in our society." A pause. The chandeliers seemed to tremble. "Today," he declared, "that poison ends. You are dismissed, effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a verdict, echoing through marble and glass. The guard lowered his head, shame painting every line of his body. 2 staff members approached, not harshly but firmly. They took him by the arm and began leading him away. He didn't resist. He couldn't. His humiliation was already complete. As he reached the edge of the hall, he turned once, his eyes meeting the woman he had wronged. She didn't glare. She didn't smirk. She simply held her husband's hand tighter, her silence more powerful than any rebuke. The crowd remained still, as though unsure if applause was appropriate or if silence was safer. The billionaire gave them the answer himself. "This," he said, gesturing toward his wife, "is the woman you watched be cast aside tonight. Remember her strength, not his cruelty. Let this hall never again be a place where dignity is questioned." And for the first time his voice rose, not in anger, but in command. "Let this place stand for respect." Thunderous applause broke out, shaking the hall, not for the firing, not for the wealth, but for the truth that had been laid bare before them all. The billionaire turned back to his wife and with a gentle smile whispered, "It's over." But even as the guard's footsteps faded into the night, another current stirred beneath the surface, an unspoken promise that their story was not yet finished. Because sometimes, when justice seems complete, life has a way of revealing one final turn, and that turn was already waiting just beyond the door. The room was still humming with whispers when he turned to face the crowd. The security guard had been escorted out, his footsteps fading like the echo of a warning bell. Yet silence now seemed to stretch across the hall, heavy and expectant. Every eye was locked on the man and woman standing at the center of the grand ballroom, the billionaire and his wife, once shamed at the door, now standing in undeniable authority. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried because the truth inside them carried weight. "Power," he began slowly, his gaze sweeping across the glittering audience, "isn't measured in the size of a fortune, but in how we treat those who cannot fight back." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some shifted in discomfort. Others leaned forward, waiting for more. His wife, her chin high, her hand resting gently on his arm, stood as living proof of the injustice that had just been undone. The shame forced upon her hours ago was gone, replaced with dignity. He paused, letting the silence breathe before continuing. "Earlier tonight, many of you watched her humiliated. You watched her told she didn't belong. Some of you laughed, others stayed silent. But understand this: silence in the face of cruelty is not neutrality. It is consent." The words cut deep, and the air seemed to tighten around the chandeliers. A few eyes dropped to the floor, a few jaws clenched. Yet he remained calm, never once resorting to anger. "This venue," he said, lifting a hand slightly toward the vaulted ceilings and golden balconies, "now belongs to my family. And under this roof, there will be no place for arrogance dressed as authority, no place for cruelty masquerading as policy. Respect is not optional. It is the foundation." His wife turned her head then, her eyes scanning the very same crowd that had turned away from her at the entrance. And for the first time that night, she wasn't the one shrinking in the shadows. She was the one bathed in the glow of vindication. He glanced at her, his voice softening. "My wife has carried herself with grace in the face of insult. I cannot undo the sting of those moments, but I can ensure she never stands alone again." The audience, still tense, seemed caught between admiration and shame. Then a single pair of hands began to clap. It was hesitant at first, uncertain, but then another joined, and another, until suddenly the room that had once turned against her was now rising to its feet, applause building like a tide. His wife closed her eyes briefly, breathing in the sound, not as vanity, but as release. For the first time all evening, her shoulders lifted free of the weight she had been carrying. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't unwanted. She was seen. The billionaire let the applause continue for a moment,
then raised his hand. The clapping faded quickly, almost obediently. "Let this night remind us all," he said firmly, "that wealth without integrity is empty, and dignity denied to one is dignity denied to us all." There was no more laughter, no more whispers, only the quiet recognition that a line had been drawn, and that everyone in the room had witnessed the turning of it. And as the music struck up once more, the couple stood together, side by side, stronger than ever. She looked radiant, not because of jewels or gowns, but because justice had lifted her higher than any staircase could. The night that began with exclusion had transformed into something else entirely, a lesson no one in that room would forget. But the story was not finished, because as the applause died down, and as the crowd returned to their champagne and hushed conversations, a new question lingered in the air. What would come next, now that power had been redefined? The night air was cool when they finally stepped out of the grand hall. The echo of murmured voices still lingered behind them, the weight of the evening hanging like smoke in the distance. But for her, for the woman who had been humiliated at the door just hours before, every breath now felt lighter, freer, as if justice itself had opened a new space inside her chest. Her husband's hand was firm in hers, not as a gesture of possession, but as a vow. Why? "I will never stand alone again." The glimmer of the city lights danced across his sharp features, but it was her radiance that outshone everything. For the first time that evening, she no longer looked down. She lifted her chin, her shoulders steady, as though the crown of dignity had returned to its rightful place. She paused on the steps, turning to glance back at the venue. Hours earlier, those same doors had been a wall, slammed shut in her face by prejudice. Now they stood wide open, but she no longer needed their welcome. The real victory was not in the ownership of a building. It was in reclaiming what had been stolen, her right to walk through the world with pride. "Are you all right?" her husband asked softly, his voice stripped of the commanding edge he had used inside. "I am," she replied, her tone quiet but resolute. "Not because of the purchase, not because he lost his job, but because I stood there tonight, and I wasn't broken." He studied her for a moment, then smiled in a way only she would notice. Gentle, almost boyish, a softness hidden beneath years of ruthless business. "That's the woman I fell in love with," he said. She chuckled faintly, but her eyes glistened. "And yet, you still had to make a spectacle." His laugh rumbled low. A spectacle was the only language they would understand. But the truth is, you taught the real lesson. As they walked toward their car, onlookers outside whispered, their eyes following every step. Some with awe, some with guilt, and some with a dawning realization. That respect isn't given because of wealth, but demanded by the unshakable dignity of the human spirit. For her, the stares no longer pierced. They were powerless now, stripped of their sting. The humiliation she had felt at the beginning of the night had been alchemized into something else entirely. A quiet strength that could not be bought or stolen. When they reached the car, she paused again. The city hummed around them, distant traffic, laughter spilling from restaurants, the soft trill of street musicians. Life was moving on, as if unaware that history had been rewritten here tonight. She turned to her husband, placing her hand gently on his chest. "Promise me," she whispered, "that we'll never fight these battles just with money. Promise me we'll fight them with truth." He laid his hand over hers, steady and sure. "I promise, because money can buy buildings, but only love and courage can change people." For a long moment they stood in silence, the world shrinking to just the two of them. Then, with quiet resolve, they slid into the car, leaving behind not just a venue,
but an old version of themselves. The true victory had not been the purchase or the firing. It was this: a woman reclaiming her dignity, a man choosing to wield power not as a weapon, but as a shield, and together, a love that transformed humiliation into triumph. As the car pulled away, the venue's golden lights faded into the distance. Ahead lay new roads, new battles, and new beginnings. But for tonight, they carried with them a truth that would outlast any contract or fortune. Real power is not the weight of wealth. It is the courage to demand respect, and the love that refuses to let it be denied. And with that, their story turned its page, leaving behind the ashes of injustice and stepping boldly into the light of something new